He was a rising star in the rap industry. At just 20 years old, he already collaborated with some of the biggest names in the game: Nicki Minaj, Travis Scott, Lil Baby, Gunna, Quavo, and Dua Lipa. He was on his way to the top. That is until he was gunned down in a rental house he was staying in Los Angeles. Let's go back to February 19th of 2020. That's when Bashar Jackson was in the swanky Hollywood Hills on a 4-day trip. Now, you might not know him by his government name Bashar. You probably know him better as Pop Smoke. That day, Pop Smoke was in the upstairs bedroom of the Airbnb he was staying in, taking a shower, when suddenly 4 masked men burst into there, pistol whipped him, and shot him 3 times. Investigators say the group found the address of where Pop Smoke was staying at from a photo posted to Instagram. By July 9th of the same year, LAPD announced they arrested 5 people in connection to the Brooklyn rapper's murder, including 19-year-old Corey Walker and 3 other teens whose names haven't been released because of their age. Now, as far as that 5th suspect who was arrested, he was ultimately not charged in Pop Smoke's death, but reportedly implicated in an unrelated string of shootings from earlier that year. So what went down? LAPD says Pop Smoke was shot by a 15-year-old, and the teens were at the Airbnb to steal his diamond Rolex and Cuban link chain. They reportedly only ended up stealing his watch and sold it for just $2,000. But Pop Smoke put up a fight. The teen shooter reportedly said they asked for his jewelry, then they got into a fight. That's when the rapper was pistol whipped and shot multiple times. Now, one of the men arrested, Corey Walker, reportedly admitted to his role in the murder after he was recorded talking to an informant. He allegedly told this informant they used a police scanner to carry out the attack. So how were they caught? An LAPD detective testified previously that surveillance video tied Corey Walker to Pop Smoke's murder. That video reportedly showed an Infiniti bringing the suspects to the Airbnb, and the license plate was traced to Corey. Previously, Corey Walker denied that he even stepped foot inside that rental and remained inside that car. But the prosecution slammed that theory after they claimed Corey Walker surveilled the Airbnb hours before the robbery and even argued he was aware the other suspects planned to rob Pop Smoke at gunpoint. Now, those details came to light back in 2021. Fast forward to 2025, a lot has changed. The then 15-year-old shooter admitted to killing Pop Smoke in May of 2023. He's expected to be in a state juvenile facility until he turns 25. He couldn't be charged as an adult under state law. Meanwhile, the 17-year-old who was also involved also pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and home invasion. He was sentenced to 4 years and 2 months in a juvenile facility. And then the third teen involved also reportedly settled his case and was sent to a post-conviction juvenile housing facility. As for Corey Walker, who was accused of leading the other 3 teens to the Airbnb, he was set to go on trial this week. Now, although his lawyer previously denied that he even went into the home, he ultimately chose to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter, home invasion robbery with gun and gang enhancements. According to Rolling Stone, under this deal, prosecutors dropped the murder charge. But he also pleaded guilty to robbing the woman who was also at the home at the time of the murder. When he was asked by the state if he agreed to the facts of the case, including that he cased the rental with a 17-year-old accomplice, left to recruit others, and returned in a different car with ski mask, gloves, a police scanner to avoid being caught, and provided a 9mm gun to one of the teens, he replied, yes. Initially, after Corey's arrest, prosecutors announced he would be eligible for the death penalty. However, under this deal, he's now facing 29 years in prison, where he's set to be sentenced at a later date. As for Pop Smoke's family, while his mom is thankful justice in a way was served, she told Rolling Stone that the heartache of her son's murder hasn't ended for her. She told the outlet, quote, "It's over for everybody except for me. This never ends for me, and that's unfair. I'm grateful that the culprits were caught. I appreciate they got justice to the fullest extent of the law. But my life doesn't change. I still don't have my son. I will continue to work on his legacy, but that's also a constant reminder that he's not here." Just a devastating case for Pop Smoke's mother and for all those who loved him and knew him. I'm joined now by attorney and former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. Nima, always great to see you. Pop Smoke was so young when he was shot and killed. Now one of the defendants is pleading guilty. He was supposed to go on trial this week, but what do you make of his guilty plea?
I'm not surprised, Elizabeth. Really, the writing was on the wall. This is a very strong case, and it was a potential capital case. Now, of course, California hasn't had the death penalty in many years, but we have a new district attorney in town, and that's Nathan Hochman, and he's very different from his predecessor, George Gascon. So this is the type of case that could have put Walker in prison for the rest of his life.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, initially prosecutors were kind of touting that he was eligible for the death penalty. So how do you go from kind of touting that to giving a plea deal, not even for life in prison, but just 29 years? Is it because he didn't pull the trigger that killed Pop Smoke?
Well, that's part of it, but we know that if you're involved in a home invasion robbery and a murder results, that's felony murder. And this is something that we all learn as law students. So you're responsible for one of your co-defendants or co-conspirators actually pulling the trigger. Now, of course, that's evidence of mitigation. So something that prosecutors will take into consideration. Obviously, the fact that someone pleads guilty, accepts responsibility, that usually will result in a lesser sentence as well. But this isn't the type of case that Walker could have pushed to trial. I mean, it's just there's no real legal defense here. This was a case that was going to resolve through pretrial negotiation, like the vast majority of criminal cases do. And the fact that he got something less than life and got 29 years really is probably consistent with what we've seen the resolution of other murder cases here in LA County.
And of course, he wasn't the only defendant in this case. Talk to me a little bit about sentencing teenagers in California. In this case, the teens involved will be out by the time they're 25 years old, including the teen who actually shot and killed Pop Smoke.
This is something that a lot of people are torn about, and our juvenile justice system here, it's called the delinquency court system, is really not set up to punish. The stated purpose is to rehabilitate. Now, of course, we know that under California law, teenagers as young as 13, they can be charged with serious crimes like this, but it's pretty rare for someone that young to be charged with murder. Oftentimes, they work their way through the delinquency court system. So they're going to try to be rehabilitated because the way the law works is obviously if you're 18, you're going to be charged as an adult. Even I believe the 17-year-old in this case was charged as an adult. But when you start getting teens that are younger, 14, 15, it's far less common for them to go through adult criminal court.
And the defense attorney for the 15-year-old shooter told Rolling Stone that his client was remorseful, saying that he was born in custody to a mom that was incarcerated, given to a community, or grew up in a community, I should say, that compelled him into associating with gangs. What do you kind of make of that statement, given his actions, clearly had devastating consequences?
Well, it's certainly not an excuse to take someone's life. And really, most murders are senseless, but this one was particularly senseless. You're talking about robbing someone for their watch, maybe worth $2,000. Was that worth taking someone's life? Obviously, these are individuals that confessed, they accepted responsibility, expressed remorse. There should be some consideration given, but it's certainly not a legal defense or an excuse because of a difficult upbringing.
And I think one thing that, sticks out to me in this case, like a lot of cases that involve rappers, is that people seem to be looking to kind of either rob them, possibly even kill them in some cases and scenarios that we've seen. We've seen this in PNB Rock. We've seen this with Julio Fulio in Florida, but also in this case too, where people are tracking down rappers by the use of their social media pages. Are you seeing a lot of that as well too? And can you talk to me a little bit about just the danger, associated with, some rappers, they just want to post on social media, but then that leads to terrible consequences sometimes.
You're absolutely right, Elizabeth, and it shows one of the major problems with social media. And in addition to the people you named, Nipsey Hussle, right? I'm sitting here in Los Angeles. I live and work in Los Angeles, and we've had a lot of robberies, including home invasion robberies, and a lot of it is people trying to flex on the gram and post, their valuables on social media. Some of them do have those valuables, and which makes it incredibly stupid. Some people don't, and they're trying to act richer than they are. But either way, it is not smart to post your location, to post your valuables on social media in real time. This is how people are targeted. And again, not an excuse, but if you are in a gang or you're looking to rob someone, everyone's on social media. It's very easy to see, well, hey, this person's got an expensive car. They have bags, they have watches. This is someone that I'm going to target.
Yeah, it's just terrible stuff. And of course, you adding Nipsey Hussle as well too. I remember when that had all happened. In this case, another thing that stands out to me is just how young all the defendants were. We have 15, 16, 17, 18 years old when all of this went down. What do you make of just how young these defendants were? Is that something that you see a lot in Los Angeles in these types of cases where, these young teenagers are planning out what was supposed to be a robbery that ended up turning into a deadly shooting?
I do see it, unfortunately. And obviously, I was a prosecutor for many years, but my wife is a lawyer for foster kids. And kids that grow up in foster care, at least here in California, the statistics are terrible. More than 50% of them, by the time they turn 18 or shortly thereafter, within a few years of turning 18, end up homeless, dead, trafficked, or in prison. Really, and again, I'm not saying that this is the cause of the foster care system, but this is a problem with, children and young adults that don't have that structure. Oftentimes, they do end up either criminals or victims of crime.
And I want to kind of go back to Corey Walker's, the aspect of his case. His sentencing hearing is coming up at the end of this month. Does the judge have any discretion as far as lessening the sentence, or is it going to be, he under this deal it was 29 years, so 29 years is what he'll be sentenced to, or does the judge have discretion to go lower, possibly even higher, even though there is a deal at play?
So there's different types of deals, and sometimes the defendant will plead, and the parties will agree to argue it out before the judge, right? The defendant will recommend one sentence, the prosecution another. The judge will decide, can go somewhere within that range, higher or even lower potentially. But when you have a deal like this in state court, typically the judge will rubber stamp the joint recommendation of the parties. And the judge can reject the deal outright because, look, let's be honest here. This was a murder, right? This was a felony murder. You know, you have someone pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter. So, what's voluntary manslaughter? That's typically when you walk in on your spouse with someone else and in a fit of rage, you kill them. Well, that's something lesser than first or second degree murder. It's still homicide. But that's typically what that's used for. Or sometimes you'll see voluntary manslaughter in what we call an imperfect self defense case. Someone unreasonably thinks that they're at risk of death or serious bodily injury and they use deadly force. They're not privileged to do so because the belief was unreasonable. Again, that's voluntary manslaughter. But this case is not voluntary manslaughter. So, if the judge is looking at this and says, well, how does the facts of this case apply to the charge? Potentially, the judge could reject it, but I think that's really unlikely, Elizabeth. I think judges, when there's a deal between the prosecution and the defense, they often, usually almost all the time, go along with it.
And, as a former federal prosecutor, do you think that the district attorney's office or prosecutors in this case felt pressure to, ensure a conviction in these cases? There's always that option. Had they gone to trial, there's that possibility, that slight possibility, it could have come back as a not guilty verdict or a hung jury. But with this deal, it would have just, made sure that they assured a conviction in this case. Do you think that's what happened here? Or do you think that that's just pretty typical in the courts where, a deal can be placed even though they were set and ready to go for trial?
These types of deals are typical. Again, very few cases go all the way to trial, usually about 1 or 2%. Murder cases are much more likely to go to trial because if you're a prosecutor, it's tough to give a discount in a case like this, right? Usually someone's lost their life. It's the most heinous act of all. Now, the reason why so many cases plead is because these types of generous offers and discounts are made and given. And our system isn't set up for every case to go to trial. Obviously, we know how backed up the courts are, not just here in Los Angeles, but all throughout the country. And if every case goes to trial, think of the judge time, think of the court staff time, think of all the people that don't even want to serve on juries, right? And if every case goes to trial, I think our system would fall apart. So I understand the criticism. People probably are saying, well, hey, you killed someone. You're only getting 25 years and you're going to serve not the full amount. So I completely get it. And I would be very upset too if I were the victim's family here potentially. But I'm just talking generally speaking, why so many cases do plead out. It's really a conservation of resources issue, right? Between the courts and the prosecution and the defense lawyers, public defender's office. They have hundreds, sometimes even thousands of cases to go through. And this is how they manage that flow.
All right. Well, excellent insight from you, Nima. I really appreciate your time today. Before we sign you off, what do you think happens at the sentencing hearing? Do you expect this defendant, Corey Walker, do you expect him to say that he's remorseful once he's actually formally sentenced?
I do, Elizabeth. Here's someone who's confessed, someone who's getting a very good deal. He should be thanking his defense lawyer. So I would not be surprised if he does accept responsibility, express remorse, address the court, maybe even the victims' families, and apologize for this really, really senseless murder. They're all senseless, but this one especially is very sad and tragic.
Yeah, it's very devastating. Nima, again, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Talk soon.
According to reports, Corey Walker hasn't formally been sentenced just yet. That'll happen at an upcoming hearing slated for February 21st. Now, Pop Smoke's mom, Audrey, told Rolling Stone she doesn't plan to attend Corey Walker's sentencing. Instead, plans to unveil a clothing line in her son's name, as well as hold a charity gala through her foundation in her son's honor called Shoot for the Stars Foundation. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.